World War II, films usually drag us straight to Hollywood's big epics, flags waving, speeches roaring, and Tom Hanks storming beaches. But what about the quiet British gems that told the same war with grit, irony, and raw humanity? These are the films buried under decades of cinematic rubble. Some were propaganda, some daring experiments, but all still pack a punch. Which of these forgotten classics will surprise you most? Let's find out. Went the Day Well? 1942. Imagine waking up to find the friendly soldiers in your village aren't friendly at all. That's the gut punch premise of Went the Day Well? A chilling British wartime thriller made right in the middle of World War II. The setup is simple yet terrifying. A sleepy English village unknowingly welcomes German paratroopers disguised as British soldiers. What follows is not some slow-building drama. It's immediate betrayal, shock, and bloodshed in a place that should have been safe. Released in 1942, the film wasn't just entertainment. It was a blunt warning to British citizens. The enemy could be anywhere, even in your backyard. And here's the kicker. It was produced by Ealing Studios, the same company that later became famous for genteel comedies. But this wasn't funny. It was ruthless. Housewives grab rifles, school teachers fight back, and the so-called gentle countryside erupts into a battleground. The film's power comes from its rawness. Made during the war itself, the threat was real and immediate. Critics later praised it for its unsentimental brutality, where ordinary villagers are forced into unthinkable acts. It's not a glossy war epic. It's a claustrophobic nightmare about survival and betrayal. Today it feels eerily ahead of its time, part spy thriller, part horror movie, part patriotic warning. If you want to see Britain in full wartime paranoia mode, this film delivers a chilling slice of 1940s reality. The Dam Busters, 1955. Before CGI explosions, before Hollywood perfected its aerial dogfights, there was The Dam Busters, a film so daring it practically invented the modern war blockbuster. Released in 1955, it tells the story of Operation Chastise, the audacious British mission to destroy German dams using bouncing bombs. Yes, you heard that right. Bouncing bombs. Engineer Barnes Wallis designed them to skip over water like flat stones. And the film revels in the sheer lunacy and brilliance of the plan. But this isn't just science fiction. The raid was real, carried out by 617 Squadron, whose pilots knew their chances of survival were slim. The movie captures both the thrilling innovation and the terrible cost. Viewers at the time were gripped by the spectacle, miniatures, real planes, and some of the most convincing special effects of the 1950s. No digital trickery, just pure ingenuity. What makes it unforgettable is its dual tone. On one hand, it celebrates British ingenuity and courage. On the other, it quietly acknowledges the devastating human. Cost half the squadron never returned, and the film doesn't shy away from that reality. Generations later, the film's influence lingers. Star Wars fans will recognize the trench run sequence in A New Hope, lifted almost shot for shot from The Dam Busters. It's proof that this forgotten British film quietly shaped pop culture in ways nobody expected. In Which We Serve, 1942. This isn't your average war movie. It's part elegy, part propaganda, and all heart. Co-directed by Noel Coward and a young David Lean, In Which We Serve was released in 1942, smack in the middle of the war. It tells the story of HMS Torrin, a fictional Royal Navy destroyer inspired by real ships sunk during the conflict. Through flashbacks, we see the lives of its crew and their families, both at sea and at home. What makes this film unique is its dual mission, to inspire morale and to humanize the war effort. Coward, who also stars as Captain Kinross, aimed to show the Navy not as faceless military machinery, but as a community of ordinary people thrown into extraordinary circumstances. From deckhands to wives waiting at home, every character feels real, making the losses sting even harder. Stylistically, the film is almost poetic. Lean's cinematic eye and Coward's flair for dialogue collide in sequences that are both intimate and epic. Bombings, sinkings, quiet family dinners, all carry equal emotional weight. And because it was produced in wartime Britain, it's soaked with authenticity. There's no post-war hindsight, no tidy resolution, just raw patriotism mixed with sorrow. It became a massive success, not just in Britain, but also in the US, where it was praised as one of the most moving depictions of naval life. Today it stands as a testament to how cinema can balance art, propaganda, and genuine emotion all at once. The Colditz Story, 1955. If you think prison escape movies begin and end with The Great Escape, think again. The Colditz Story beat it by almost a decade, telling the true story of Allied POWs locked inside Colditz Castle, the supposedly escape-proof German fortress. The catch? These weren't just any prisoners. Colditz housed the most escape-prone officers Britain and her allies had to offer. In other words, it was a powder keg of ingenuity waiting to blow. Released in 1955 and based on Major Pat Reed's memoir, the film dramatizes his own daring escape attempts. This isn't about brute force. It's about cunning, patience, and a bit of lunacy. Prisoners dig tunnels, build disguises, forge documents, and risk everything for a shot at freedom. Each attempt feels like a nail-biting chess match between brains and brutality. What sets it apart from Hollywood's later takes is its understated style. There's no glossy heroism here, no swelling music to tell you how to feel. Instead, the tension comes from the simple question: can they outwit the guards? Critics at the time praised its sharp pacing and attention to detail. And for audiences, especially veterans, it struck a nerve. It wasn't fantasy, it was lived experience. While The Great Escape became the icon, the Colditz Story remains a leaner, sharper portrayal of ingenuity under pressure. This film deserves to stand shoulder to shoulder with its flashier American cousins, because sometimes the quietest stories are the most gripping. The Way Ahead, 1944. Every war epic needs its origin story, and The Way Ahead gave Britain just that. Directed by Carol Reed in 1944, the film follows a ragtag group of civilians drafted into the army. They're shopkeepers, bus drivers, and clerks, men with no military background, suddenly thrown into uniforms and told to fight Hitler. Sound familiar? It's the story of millions of British men, condensed into one platoon. David Niven leads as Lieutenant Perry, tasked with shaping this hopeless bunch into soldiers. At first, the recruits are clumsy, defiant, even laughable, but through training, camaraderie, and shared hardship, they transform into a cohesive fighting unit. By the time they ship out, the audience feels the weight of that transformation. What's remarkable is how the film balances humor and gravity. There are light moments, squabbles, blunders, cheeky banter that feel authentic. But Reed never lets us forget the stakes. These aren't superheroes. They're ordinary men facing extraordinary danger. That's why the final act, when they march into battle, hits so hard. The film was part morale booster, part recruitment tool, and part honest reflection of Britain's citizen army. And it worked. Contemporary audiences saw themselves on screen, laughed at the struggles, and felt pride in the resilience. Today, The Way Ahead still resonates because it's not about glory. It's about growth, grit, and the quiet bravery of men who never thought they'd be soldiers. Ice Cold in Alex, 1958. Sometimes the smallest victories mean the most, and Ice Cold in Alex proves it. This film isn't about grand battles or sweeping victories. It's about survival in the desert and the tantalizing promise of one cold beer at the end of hell. Released in 1958, it follows Captain Anson, played by John Mills, who must escort a group, including a nurse and a mysterious South African officer, through the scorching North African desert in a battered ambulance nicknamed Katie. The setup is deceptively simple: get to Alexandria. The journey, though, is anything but. Sandstorms, German patrols, mechanical breakdowns, and dwindling supplies turn the desert into an endless death trap. The tension isn't built on gunfights, but on whether the ambulance will even make it up the next dune. What sets this movie apart is its sheer realism. The desert isn't a backdrop, it's the enemy. Director J. Lee Thompson shot much of it on location, and you can practically feel the sweat dripping, the sand grinding in teeth, the exhaustion weighing down every step. And then there's the legendary final scene, Captain Anson savoring a tall, frosty beer after days of torment. That single glass of lager became one of the most famous moments in British cinema, later used in advertisements for years. It's not flashy, but it's unforgettable. Ice Cold and Alex captures the war in microcosm: endurance, suspicion, fleeting relief, and the fragile hope that keeps people alive. A Matter of Life and Death, 1946. If most war films show mud, blood, and misery, A Matter of Life and Death dares to be cosmic. Directed by the visionary duo Powell and Pressburger, this 1946 film is part fantasy, part romance, and part war meditation. The story opens with squadron leader Peter Carter, played by David Niven, bailing out of his damaged bomber without a parachute. He should die instantly, but instead, he wakes up alive on a beach. Why? Because a celestial messenger missed him in the fog. From there, the film plays out as a strange, beautiful trial in the afterlife. Should Peter be allowed to live, given that he was destined to die? The case is argued before a heavenly court. While on Earth, Peter falls in love with an American radio operator, June. It's a courtroom drama that spans heaven and earth, blending surreal visuals with deep questions about fate, love, and sacrifice. What makes it stand out in the World War II canon is its daring tone. Released just after the war, it avoided patriotic bombast in favor of poetic allegory. The Technicolor sequences on Earth glow with warmth, while the afterlife scenes, filmed in black and white, feel stark and unsettling. Critics called it one of the most inventive British films ever made, and it still feels ahead of its time. Forget gritty realism. A Matter of Life and Death proves that wartime cinema could be experimental, philosophical, and utterly unique. The Cruel Sea, 1953. War at sea isn't glamorous. It's cold, relentless, and merciless. That's the unflinching message of The Cruel Sea, one of the most respected British war films ever made. Released in 1953 and based on Nicholas Montserrat's novel, it tells the story of Commander Erickson, played by Jack Hawkins, leading a Royal Navy corvette during the Battle of the Atlantic. From the opening, the film makes it clear: the real enemy is the sea itself. Yes, German U-boats lurk beneath, but it's the constant threat of storms, fatigue, and icy waves that grinds men down. The film's most shocking moment comes when Erickson orders depth charges dropped on a German submarine, knowing full well that British sailors struggling in the water will be killed too. It's a devastating choice, and the movie doesn't flinch. What gives the film its power is its authenticity. Real ships were used in filming, and many extras were veterans who had actually served in the Atlantic convoys. Historian James Holland once called it the most accurate naval film ever made, and it shows. There are no glossy heroics here, just grinding endurance, exhaustion, and occasional flashes of courage. Decades later, The Cruel Sea still holds a perfect reputation. It's more than a war movie. It's a meditation on duty, sacrifice, and the bitter cost of survival. Malta Story, 1953. Not all turning points of the war happened on famous beaches or in grand cities. Some took place on a tiny Mediterranean island, and Malta Story shines a light on one of the war's most overlooked battles. Released in 1953, the film stars Alec Guinness as a British intelligence officer and Jack Hawkins as a pilot defending Malta during its brutal siege by Axis forces. The film weaves two threads: the strategic importance of Malta, a lifeline for Allied shipping, and the human toll of constant bombardment. Civilians dig into shelters, supplies run dangerously low, and the island becomes a punching bag for relentless German and Italian air raids. Shot partly on location, the film uses real newsreel footage of the bombings, giving it a raw, documentary-like texture. The blending of fiction and reality drives home just how precarious Malta's survival really was. Without Malta, the Allies might have lost the Mediterranean, and the film makes that clear without resorting to heavy-handed speeches. Though less famous than other war dramas, Malta Story captures a critical piece of history often overshadowed by bigger campaigns. Its gritty realism, combined with Guinness's understated performance, keeps it compelling decades later. Sometimes forgotten, always vital, This film reminds us that small islands can change the course of a world war. The One That Got Away, 1957. Here's a twist. A British World War II film where the hero is actually a German. The One That Got Away tells the true story of Luftwaffe pilot Franz von Wehr, the only German prisoner of war to escape from British custody and make it back to Germany. Released in 1957, the film leans into the incredible cat-and-mouse story of his multiple escape attempts. Captured in 1940, von Wehr became a legend for his sheer audacity. He tried escaping during prisoner transfers, disguised himself as a Dutch pilot, and even managed to steal a plane from an RAF airfield before being caught again. Eventually, he was shipped to Canada, where he slipped away across the frozen St. Lawrence River. Lawrence River into neutral U.S. territory, an escape so wild it sounds like fiction. What makes the film unusual is its perspective. Instead of demonizing him, it portrays von Wehr as resourceful, daring, and relentless. A man obsessed with getting back into the fight. Played with charm by Hardy Kruger, the character walks a fine line between enemy and anti-hero. British audiences were fascinated, partly because it humanized the other side, showing not just villains but determined individuals. The film's restrained style and matter-of-fact narration make the escapes feel more like a documentary than Hollywood spectacle. It's a reminder that even in war, stories of ingenuity and obsession cross enemy lines. The One That Got Away remains one of the most unique British war films ever made. Dunkirk, 1958. Before Christopher Nolan turned Dunkirk into a high-tech spectacle, Britain had already told the story, quietly, grimly, and with devastating realism. The 1958 version of Dunkirk focuses not on cinematic trickery, but on the raw ordeal of evacuation. The film follows two parallel strands: a group of weary British soldiers trudging through enemy territory, and civilians in small boats answering the call to rescue them. Unlike the modern blockbuster take, this one feels stripped down, closer to how veterans described it. There's mud, exhaustion, bickering, and a crushing sense of being abandoned. The soldiers aren't portrayed as flawless heroes. They're human, often scared and resentful. Shot largely on real locations with thousands of extras, the film grounds the evacuation in a harsh realism. The sea crossings are messy, the beaches chaotic, and the victories bittersweet. At its core, it's less about military triumph and more about the resilience of ordinary people when the chips were down. For years, it was overshadowed by flashier war films, but Dunkirk 1958 stands as a reminder that survival itself was the miracle, and sometimes a quiet victory is more powerful than a roaring one. They were not divided, 1950. War doesn't always begin with battles. It starts with training, waiting, and the endless grind of turning civilians into soldiers. They were not divided, 1950. Captures that slow transformation. Directed by Terrence Young, who would later helm James Bond adventures, this semi-documentary follows a trio of guardsmen from enlistment through combat in North Africa and Normandy. What makes it distinctive is the way it leans heavily on authenticity. Many of the extras were real guardsmen, and the film uses genuine military routines, drills, and maneuvers. There's almost no attempt to dress things up. It feels like a raw snapshot of what recruits actually endured. Instead of romanticizing battle, it lingers on the mud, the waiting, and the quiet friendships forged in between. When the fighting finally comes, it's sudden, brutal, and unglamorous. Men we've come to know vanish in seconds, underlining just how arbitrary survival could be. The understated tone makes those losses sting far more than any grand Hollywood score ever could. Critics later praised the film's honesty, calling it less a traditional drama and more a living record. Forgotten by many today, it remains a powerful reminder that the war wasn't just about great leaders or famous battles. It was about ordinary men slogging through mud, holding rifles, and hoping to make it home. Angels, 1-5, 1952. The Battle of Britain gets plenty of attention, but Angels 1-5 is the version that nails the day-to-day grind of life on an RAF base. Released in 1952, the film follows a young pilot joining a seasoned squadron just as the Luftwaffe onslaught intensifies. Rather than focusing solely on dogfights, the story digs into the mechanics of survival, aircraft maintenance, radio operators, the quiet exhaustion of men pushed to their limits. When the battles do hit, they're sharp, tense, and brutally short. No glory-filled aerial ballets, just sudden violence in the skies. What sets it apart is its detail. The title itself, Angels 1-5, is RAF code for altitude 15,000 feet, a small but telling sign of its authenticity. Real aircraft were used in filming, and veterans praised its accuracy. There's also a subtle message running through the film. Survival isn't just about pilots. It's about teamwork, from ground crew to commanders. While flashier depictions of the Battle of Britain stole the spotlight later, this film endures for its understated power. It doesn't scream patriotism. It whispers exhaustion, resilience, and camaraderie. San Demetrio, London, 1943. Most war films focus on guns and bombs. San Demetrio, London dares to focus on grit, fire, and stubbornness. Released in 1943, during the war itself, it dramatizes the real-life ordeal of a British oil tanker hit by a German raider in the Atlantic. Abandoned by its crew after being set ablaze, the ship seemed doomed. But against all odds, a handful of sailors managed to reboard, put out the fires, and navigate the crippled vessel back to Britain with its precious cargo intact. The film's power lies in its simplicity. No generals, no massive armies, just a small crew battling fire, flooding, and exhaustion. The drama feels almost like a survival thriller, decades before the genre was fashionable. Audiences at the time were stunned by the story, both because it was true and because it highlighted the overlooked bravery of merchant seamen. Critics praised it for its honesty, and wartime viewers found inspiration in its quiet heroism. Today it serves as a rare reminder that the war was won not just by soldiers and airmen, but by civilian crews who risked everything on the open sea. The Wooden Horse, 1950. Before Steve McQueen made motorcycle jumps iconic, The Wooden Horse showed how British POWs pulled off one of the most ingenious escapes of the war. Released in 1950, it's based on the true story of Stalag Luft 3. Yes, the same camp later immortalized in The Great Escape. The twist? Instead of digging tunnels in secret at night, prisoners built a wooden vaulting horse. Every day they carried it into the yard, practiced gymnastics over it, and quietly concealed their tunneling beneath. Guards saw nothing suspicious, just a bunch of men exercising. In reality, they were inching closer to freedom with every passing day. The film captures the sheer audacity of the plan. The monotony, the risk, the psychological pressure, it's all there. Unlike its Hollywood successor, The Wooden Horse doesn't glamorize the story with big stunts. It plays it straight, which makes the eventual success all the more satisfying. For post-war audiences, it was a story of ingenuity and persistence, proof that British resourcefulness could outwit even the most watchful enemy. Today, it still stands tall as one of the cleverest, most underrated escape films ever made. So, there you have it. 15 British WWII films that never made the glossy poster lists, but still carry the weight of history. They're gritty, inventive, sometimes bizarre, but all unforgettable. Which one of these overlooked gems deserves a revival? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to know which hidden classic you'd put on the big screen again. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more forgotten treasures waiting to be rediscovered.